This is Viva Fry.
I'm Dr. Peter McCullough.
This is Tom Luongo.
This is Chuck Prodnick.
This is Alex Kreiner.
Hey, this is Brad Wall.
This is JP Sears.
Hi, this is Frank Peretti.
This is Tammy Peterson.
This is Danielle Smith.
This is James Lindsay.
Hey, this is Brett Kissel, and you're listening to the Shaun Newman Podcast.
Welcome to the podcast, folks. Happy Wednesday. Okay. Today is something I just want to, yesterday's I recorded it well before the election, so we've had that all come out. I'm sure for most of us, not what we were hoping, or maybe you were hoping. I don't know. I've had lots of different people texting, calling, and there's some, I don't know. There's just both. There's a lot of different views on this, which I'm sure we're going to get into over the coming weeks. But I just want to, I've been getting lots of feedback on the live stream. We did 12 hours. I want to thank all the guests that came on. It was incredible to have that many people come on and share their thoughts, insights, and then to have, at the end of the stream, simultaneously watching, we had just under 89,000. It was 88,700 and change. And, the preliminary numbers over just the first, I'm not even at 24 hours as I record this, was on the one channel, there was over 100,000 people had tuned in and out. So, I mean, that in itself, you're that's pretty wild. And we were, as far as we can tell, number 2 behind the CBC, which is pretty, incredible for people watching simultaneously, right? There's going to be channels out there that got 1.7 million followers that over the course of time are going to have people, just go check it out for a little bit and then come back in. But simultaneously watching, we were consistently number 2 behind the CBC, which, when you think about that, folks, that's freaking wild. So I want to give a shout out to everybody who tuned in, all the guests who tuned on, and then to Bow Valley Credit Union and Silver Gold Bull for being the title sponsors. They really helped, honestly, build it up or allow us to come in and do a great show and proceed on to the next ones with some confidence that we can go out and find title sponsors that believe in what we're doing, and then to perform it that well. Hopefully in time that'll become just a fixture of what Tuz and I do with our mashup live coverages. Another shout out to Garden Girl. She'd reached out, Ariel. If you haven't checked out gardengirl.ca, please do. She's been a guest on the mashup before, and just a lovely lady. And then we had a silent donor in the back. You know who you are. Shout out to you as well. We just think very highly of all of you. I always say that, but truthfully, it's been a crazy 24 hours. The election. Hopefully, you enjoyed it, and obviously, once again, you're staring at what is today and what it means for Canada under Mark Carney as the Prime Minister of Canada. It's just and Pierre Poilievre losing his seat in Carleton, Jagmeet Singh, on and on and on. I was never a dull day on this side. So just appreciate everybody who tuned in and helped make the live stream what it was. I should probably give one more shout out to Brett, who was our tech guy in the back. He just did fantastic work and continues to do. That's how we get the live map and really get to see the live data. We're already, 10 minutes after it's done, we're talking about, what did we like? What did we didn't like? What can we make better for the next time? And that's what we're going to strive to do whenever the next election coverage comes around. Either way, just really appreciate everyone who made it what it was. And pretty surreal to have those type of numbers for, 2 small town Saskatchewan kids, with this idea of trying to make election coverage something you want to tune into. And I think we proved that last night that we have an idea, and it continues to work, and continue to appreciate all the guest suggestions that all of you send this way. And we continue to try and track down. Okay, I'm almost 5 minutes in. I should get to Silver Gold Bull. With the number of ounces of silver needed to buy an ounce of gold now at nearly 30-year highs, silver is now bargain priced when compared to gold, and it's the perfect time to protect a portion of your savings with silver. And Silver Gold Bull has a wide variety of best value silver of every budget. Simply text or email Grahame for details. Whether you're a seasoned investor or new to precious metals, Grahame will work to answer all your questions and recommend the best products to meet your investing goals. If you're doing anything on SGB, silvergoldbull.ca.com. Just make sure to reference the Shaun Newman podcast. If you're looking for the best prices, best deals, I would give Grahame a text or a call and find out. That's all down in the show notes. Bow Valley Credit Union, they're your Alberta-regulated, fully serviced financial institution, and they're proud to present the first in Canada gold collateral lending. Now you can all lend against your physical gold and silver for favorable rates. And it's kind of like, it's kind of like a HELOC on your gold and silver. And if you don't have any, they can help get a loan to purchase your gold and silver. Just shoot welcome@bowvalleycu.com. Ask for Leanna and get your account started today. Profit River. If you're probably sitting there watching the election results going, oh my God. And you heard Twos talking about the lady out east who got elected, who's all about gun control. Well, I wouldn't wait, folks. I would reach out to Joel, and he's their internet sales phone and internet sales manager. And he, if you shoot him an email at smp@profitriver.com, for those listening on the podcast, it's all down in the show notes. You can get to, some of their deals, some of the things they got going on. He can help you through it all. Just make sure, whether it's over the phone, in person, online, you reference the code SNP. It's going to get you into a $100 gift card draw every month, and that you make a purchase, that is. And, of course, they specialize in, they are the major retailer of firearms, optics, and accessories. They serve all across Canada. And you just got to go to profitriver.com. You can see everything they're working with. Caleb Taves, Renegade Acres. They do the community spotlight. Well, we're just days away now from the Cornerstone Forum. You have until this Friday to actually, that's a lie. Let me correct that. You have until Saturday night to get your tickets in that are full access. That includes lunch and supper. And the details for the Cornerstone Forum are down in the show notes. I tell you, that won't be a dull time, folks. That is going to be an interesting day, May 10th in Calgary. If you haven't purchased a ticket, I would highly, highly suggest you do. And we're going to have some interesting open conversations happening in Calgary. Substack, it's free to subscribe to. You can get the weekend review every Sunday at 5 p.m. And you can also become a paid member. There's some behind-the-scenes footage, usually in the form of pictures, but some relevant details on some different things. Obviously, the debrief on guests when they come in studio. And speaking of studios, we got a new studio. I just got to show it to Twos when he was in town, and it's coming along. If you're wanting to be on the value for value, the legacy wall, we're looking for skills, labor, materials, money. It all helps. And you can just shoot me a text if you're interested in that. If you're listening or watching on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Rumble, X, make sure to subscribe. Make sure to leave a review. Make sure to share with a friend. The reason we got to 88,000+ people watching simultaneously was quite simply all of you who shared it and continued to promote it. That's what we want here. And if you think these conversations are value of other people's times, we'd love it if you'd share it along. All right, let's get on to that tale of the tape. He's a host of Michael Campbell's Money Talks. I'm talking about Michael Campbell. So buckle up. Here we go. Welcome to the Shaun Newman podcast. Today, I'm joined by Michael Campbell. Michael, thanks for giving me some time today.
Oh, my pleasure. Absolutely no shortage of things to talk about.
No, isn't that the truth? Before we get too into, I don't want to skip over what I normally do with a guest the first time they're on. I know there's an insane amount to talk about, but before we get there, I got to give a shout out to my three older brothers. They've listened to Money Talks for a long time, and they introduced it to me almost like a rite of passage, if you will. I'm sure at a younger age, lots of kids, including myself, young adults, can't be bothered by some of the topics you cover, or just more of the seriousness of life. And then you get married, you have kids, and all of a sudden you're like, what is going on? And they're like, oh, maybe you should listen to Money Talks. And I'm like, oh, okay. So then you start listening, you're like, oof, this is something, and then you got your conference, and that's how I got introduced to Martin Armstrong, and and on it goes. So for me, I know a lot about you, but I'm going to assume my audience doesn't. So I guess I just want to start with, if you could just tell the audience a little bit about yourself And you don't have to, you joked about before we started going long-winded. This is a podcast. Tell the story, and then we'll get into election and everything else.
Well, I'll give you the quick version, but I remember I was fascinated with politics, but understood that you couldn't understand politics without understanding economics, without understanding taxation and things of that sort. And we're going back a long time. We're going back, certainly into the late 70s, early 80s. And from there, I did a lot of broadcasting very early on and continue to do broadcasting. Very fortunate to work right now with Global TV. But before that, there was other manifestations of it. Lectured out at UBC. I think I was the first person to lecture on both the internet and currency movements. I thought that was a huge hole in our education, not understanding that capital does in fact move. I worked for Merrill Lynch in New York for a number of years, back out in Vancouver in the investment business. Started my own business quite separately in manufacturing with a terrific partner who sadly has passed away, but that was, I learned an awful lot about things that way. So I've always said just the practicality is important. I can read it in theory, and it doesn't matter if we're talking markets or we're talking how to run a business, et cetera. That practical experience, I think, has been invaluable to me. And as I say, when you get this old, and you start reliving or reviewing all of those years, and my God, you can go to so many different directions that way. But yeah, it's a business background, a financial background, and financial and economic analysis really for decades. So it's all of that wrapped into one. And yeah, I'm still, if you can believe it, still doing a little bit of broadcasting, still doing stuff, still doing money talks, et cetera. And it's a fantastic time to do it, a time that we sort of had forecast a number of years ago that we're just continue to gain momentum in the rate of change.
Well, I want to go back. You tell me when it is, but I got introduced to Martin Armstrong in 2020, and I remember watching virtually your conference and being like, "Who the heck is this guy?" Like, honestly, some of the things he was saying, I was like, "This is pretty wild." And then, as the story goes, I got to have Martin on here, and since then, several times, quite consistently actually, and that was almost a surreal moment for me to just like sit and talk to this guy. Now, I've only been talking to Martin, let's just say I've been introduced to him in the last 5 years. When did you first stumble on Martin? And what was it that stuck out to you that you're like, this is somebody to pay attention to?
Well, I'd been at the University of Sussex in England, and I got firsthand what currency movements mean, what the exchange rate does, because I had a fixed rate Canadian dollar scholarship, but the Canadian dollar fell. So when I was converting to, in that case, the pound, it was, oh my gosh, I've got a lot less money. And again, none of this was taught at university for years, decades to come about the importance of currencies. Well, there's Marty writing about capital movement as being the key variable to understand. So we're talking back 1981, 82. The other thing that I got tremendous benefit from my friendship with Marty over the years was he introduced me to computer modeling. And I'm talking again, we're talking over 40 years ago. He already had a model up and running, wasn't the Socrates model at that point, and really getting me to understand that the human mind can't process the number of variables that have an impact. And I'm talking back in those days, it was very different for people to think that it's not just domestic issues that impact the price of a stock or the price of the currency or, something like gold or even real estate. In Vancouver, that became a lot more obvious when we started to have the first influx of sort of Hong Kong Chinese buying of real estate. Then people said, wait a second, that's an external variable impacting us. Well, Marty's the pioneer in that. It's certainly the pioneer in capital flows. And so to be able to have that understanding and have the understanding of how modeling works, I had tremendous benefit from Marty over the years.
One final on Martin, because I'm just always curious, and fascinated by, I've watched the documentary on him. I've been able to talk to him a ton about just life in general, away from the things that have went on in the models and what his predictions and on and on. But one of the things, as a guy who ran into him in the 80s, and you get to see him predict some of the things, you're like, this is, I assume, I sit here and assume, because I was born in 86, so you can just imagine I wasn't thinking about any of this for a long time.
Yeah.
that must have been wild. And I assume it was wild when he ended up in prison and started releasing things there. Just from where you sat, were you like, what is going on in the world? Or I don't know. I'd just be curious your viewpoint on a few different key moments through those times.
Yeah, I knew Marty very well by then, and when word came that he had been put in prison, I was in shock. And then when I read what it was about, which, by the way, everything they said at the outset of putting Marty in prison, they completely dismissed. Really where I think it came down to was Marty came home one day. At that point, he's living in New Jersey, and the CIA was in his house. They wanted the model that had called successfully the fall of the Berlin Wall to the day, the peak in the Nikkei index, more recently, the currency issues that were going on, especially again with the Russia changes in Russia. They wanted the model. Marty was not going to give them the model. Next thing he knows, they're in his house and he's arrested. And he was held in contempt of court, the longest standing citizen in U.S. history. He was held in contempt, not convicted of anything. And, clearly there was other issues going on. There was, keep in mind the track record of that modeling, and Marty would always tell you it's not him, it's the model he uses, was, magnificent, including, one of the days I remember because I sort of smile at it. He was always very generous with his time with me, and I phoned him up and he says, look, I can't talk right now. I'll give you a call back. And he phones back and he says, sorry, Margaret Thatcher was in my office and they were wondering about the euro at that point. And I'm saying, yeah, but I know he advised, the Reagan White House too, and right up to more recently, talking to RFK. And I think Marty had a great influence that he did not run. He said, you can't win. My model says you cannot win. So you better decide what your role is going to be, who you want to be. So it continues to this day. But the actual incarceration is a phenomenal injustice. As I say, he'd go into the court and the CIA would be in the courtroom, with him, continued to deny. And, as I say, longest standing person who was held in contempt of court, but with horrendous incidences along the way. Like one day his cell door was left open and he got beaten over the head with a typewriter and put in a coma. And just the list just goes on with him. And what's remarkable, Shaun, is when I talked to him the day after he got out, I couldn't believe the lack of bitterness in him. Me, I'd be saying, I'm glad there's no gun control. They stole part of his life. They stole so much from him over the years. But no, he just went on, and obviously welcomed. When he first came out, by the way, he didn't think anybody would want to hear him. And I was asked that on the documentary. I said, well, you know what? I know the business pretty well. And generally, when you call every major turn in the market, they'll still like you. And of course, that's what's happened. But
you would know this better than most, obviously, with your relationship with him. And in the short time I've got to know Martin, I am struck by his humbleness, actually.
Yes.
I've talked to him lots on the phone. I have my event coming up on May 10th here in Calgary. He's coming to it in person. And I've dealt with a lot of people on this show.
Yeah.
And, not to gush over Martin Armstrong by any stretch, but you would think a guy like that, as you're pointing out, he comes out and he's not bitter. I am always struck at how just, I don't know, just humble he is. I actually don't know of a better word than that. He's just a regular guy, I guess. Maybe that's the best way to put it. I don't know. And you probably have seen that now for 40 plus years.
Yes, absolutely. I've never seen anything else but that. But that's part of the analytical mind in that, as I say, Marty will regularly point out that it's the model that's doing the talking, not him. And he'll say, anytime I have opposed the model,
Yeah.
I'm wrong. The model.
Well, okay. So one of the things, and this is what gets me in an election, when I talked to Martin, I can't remember what that was, 3 years ago, we talked about Canada splitting up into, is it multiple countries? Is it multiple, he just, and I'm like, Martin, how does that happen? He's like, how does that happen? I have no idea, and I'm like, okay, well, what big event would happen? He's like, what could be something so inconsequential? How could we possibly predict that? And then 2025 election happens. And I know the sentiment here in Alberta.
Yeah.
And I go, one more piece into what Martin's prediction is, because, I thought if Pierre gets even a minority, it's going to dampen the resolve of Western Canadians. Instead, it's a liberal minority, and with what seats the NDP are getting, it looks like they could form government, and you look at that and you're like, oh, maybe that adds into it. I guess to switch off Martin into Canada, the election. You sat down. I'm sure you watched it all. I'm sure you have your thoughts. Pierre loses his seat. Singh loses his seat. Carney gets the liberal minority. I know that's a whole lot to throw at you, but it just happened in less than 12 hours ago as we're talking here. What sticks out to you? What are your thoughts on the Canadian election?
Well, I put it also back into a bigger picture, like an international picture. And there's very few countries where the incumbent party won. Now, it did it in Ireland, it did it in Western Australia, and a few others. But then we have the notable exceptions where the sort of throw the bums out kind of approach, which we saw in the Netherlands, which we saw in Italy, Argentina. And so it's that context. I was fascinated on a big picture to see where we're at in that cycle. And when the polls started to say that Mr. Carney, Prime Minister Carney, had won, I'm thinking to myself, okay, this is the establishment's last hurrah. And I believe that we have seen these major trends. I've been at least processing them as an anti-establishment move, that we saw it in the States, with Kamala Harris. I thought this was paralleling a lot of what I saw in the States, but I wanted to wait and see. And so to me, as we go through the next several years, if they don't try and reconcile and have a more conciliatory tone, especially to Western Canada. And I don't think the Eastern pundits get that. If you watch CBC, you're only watching Eastern guys most of the time. They don't get, you mentioned Alberta, where there was an overwhelming result, in favor of change, in favor of the Conservative Party. Well, I'd say no wonder. I mean, it's cost the Alberta people. Their one gift has been, energy, has been oil and gas, et cetera. Clearly that the Liberal Party has opposed that and done a great deal of damage on that basis. Why would they sign up for more of that, especially for a country that has 1.5% of total global emissions? A country where if you shut down the whole oil sands projects, you're talking about, maybe 0.2% of global emissions. Like the talk about no cost benefit analysis has been done. I mean, there's so much around that. But clearly the Liberals represented, come on, Mr. Carney, for a guy who's never run, showed a lot of the traits of politicians which I'm not comfortable with. One is, oh yeah, we'd allow pipelines, but we'll give Quebec a veto over it. Well, we already know what that ends up. We're going to give First Nations a veto. There's going to be no pipeline, and that's, if I'm in Alberta, I'm thinking, and I'm in Canada saying the same thing. We can't afford this anymore. We can't afford to put in green policies with no cost benefit analysis. And Shaun, I know I can go on, probably wondering, do I ever take a breath? I haven't in 3 years. No, but you had the Parliamentary Budget Office make it very clear. We have never done a cost benefit analysis on any green policy. Well, there is a cost, there is so what did we get for it? And so I'm not surprised people in Alberta and other parts of the West, Saskatchewan's pretty strong. Manitoba was a bit of a mix, but I'm not surprised at that, and I think that's still if I watch the CBC, which I don't regularly, I'm like the rest of Canadians, I don't watch CBC English language television, but if I did, or when I do, I can't believe they're all Eastern residences, and I don't think they're sensitive to how important that issue is. And that's the kind of thing that, going back to what you said earlier about what would further strain the unity of our country, that's the issue that I would come up with right now. And there's more stuff on the horizon, but that's the issue I'd come up with, that this is a very important economic issue, obviously more so to Alberta, and Eastern Canada doesn't get it.
Well, I'm gonna tell you this right now. You don't have to keep apologizing for talking too long. One of the reasons I wanted you on is I know myself and others find your insights, because you've been in this world for a long time, talking to brilliant people, looking at the economy and how things are going to be impacted and everything else. And when I jumped to Carney, okay, Carney is the new official Prime Minister of Canada. What does that mean for the economy of Canada. There's a whole bunch of things in there. Last night I heard him say, interprovincial trade is going to be tax-free by July 1st. That was one of the things he said. He also brought up, climate change and green policy. I don't know if he used green policy exactly.
No.
Forgive me for paraphrasing, but I thought it was one of the things I hadn't heard him talk about in the entire election. And last night in his speech, that came up. There's other things like, well, actually, we'll just stick with that for a second, then I can add more things in.
Well, I think when you look at his budget projections, $230 billion in new spending, or, the deficit exploding, that kind of stuff. Well, there's no other way around that they've got to get money. So I would expect taxes to go up. I would expect him with his national carbon tax makes us less competitive. There's no doubt of that. And that's where I find it challenging, because we're clear. You can't come up with a statistic economically that was positive over the last 10 years, especially now. You have the Bank of Canada, unprecedented, to say we've got an emergency when it comes to capital GDP per capita. But the other one is capital investment per worker. While the US went up, we went down. How can our workers compete when we're spending literally half per worker on capital investment? And that's what we're dealing with. Well, that doesn't change when you raise taxes on business. This is always the puzzle of the organized left. Like, don't you get it? Your workers are suffering. When you have lower capital investment per worker, well, that's a guarantee of lack of job security, guarantee of less, wage pressures on the downside. You should be voting for things that improve our productivity, and that means capital investment. We need money to do those things. It's straightforward. Well, I'm puzzled. Mr. Carney would know that. Prime Minister Carney would know that. Well, how? But it shows me that his green agenda supersedes the economic one. And that's what we've been living for 10 years. And I think that is a legitimate concern. We've had zero productivity growth since 2019. Wages go up 0.3% over that period of time. None of those stats augur well for protecting our standard of living. And so he gives lots of mixed messages that way. And my worry is that, as in the past, people have to understand that his commitment to climate change and policies around climate change, whether he's the co-founder of net zero, may produce policies that sort of a continuation of the erosion of the Canadian economic strength.
He brought up comments about Americans in specific. I found it very, and continue to find it, I guess. I think the word that comes to mind is adversarial.
Yes.
That we're going to almost distance ourselves from our largest trading partner, our biggest ally.
Well, keep in mind, that was the number one issue that the Liberal Party could run on. They were not going to run on their economic record. They weren't going to run on the results. And they're not going to run on the fact that 2 million people use a food bank. 43% of Canadians under 40 borrow money for necessities. They're not standing up and saying, hey, guess what? We've got a huge percentage of people, like 43%, think they're living in poverty right now. They get that long list. So they couldn't run on that. So the big variable that I think was at least not predicted was the Trump variable, the rally against Trump. And so that's what they ran on. We're going to be the 51st state. Well, actually, that would be against the Constitution of the United States. So it ain't happening. Can you imagine the hoops they'd have to go through here? Not happening. It didn't stop them from talking about it, because that was the most receptive issue, including, by the way, I guess it was this past week, you've got Mark Carney talking about the March 28th phone call he had with President Trump. At the time, he literally said it went well, and that President Trump respects Canada's sovereignty. 4 weeks later, he remembered that Trump said he wanted to be 51st state. Well, I wasn't born last night. That was just straight political rhetoric. So that was the most, why did he say it? Because that resonated with the most Canadians. And that's why they played that card nonstop. That's why, one of the facts that people don't know is that CSIS warned the federal government that China wanted to attach Pierre Poilievre to Trump. That was one of Chinese psyop goals. So there's all of that kind of stuff, that's gone on. So, I mean, it's just they could have done something. I mean, who knows what was going on that way? But that's why they talked about it. It wasn't going to happen. It wasn't going to happen. So, but they talked about it because that's what resonated. There's no issue that was as close as the sort of anti-Trump attraction.
I'm really curious then, and your thoughts. You bring up 43% of Canadians feel like they're living in poverty. Correct? I heard that right?
Feel they're living in poverty. 43% of those under 40 borrow money for necessities. And there's all sorts of stats that just reconfirm that general problem.
So to me, that's not 10%. Like that's a huge number.
Yeah.
And so one of the things we'd talked out here is like, the polls, everything, this, that, or like people vote when they go to the grocery store, or at least the thought process was they go to the grocery store and they see over the course of whatever it is, 9 years, 2 years, take your pick on the years. But every year you go to the grocery store, you get less and less for the money you spend.
Yes.
I don't think that is a shocker to anyone. And we thought the common person would vote for change because of that.
I would interject one thing there. You have to break it down by age group. So younger Canadians were more likely to face those pressures. Older Canadians weren't. They weren't in the housing market, for example. As an example, obviously there's going to be exceptions or percentages, but the majority of older Canadians weren't getting squeezed by affordable rent problems. They weren't entering the housing market. They were in the housing market. They benefited from the Bank of Canada's policies that basically said in March 2020, we'll guarantee all 5-year mortgages. Well, presto, explosion in the housing prices. They're not the ones who are impacted. So I think your observation is correct. I would just divide it into what age group we're talking about. I think the younger you are, the more impactful you are by the kind of policies that have been in place. And by the way, the media has a real challenge, not the independent media, but let's call it the legacy media has a problem because, again, the percentage of people in the media who are in that second category, in the more established financially category, is much higher than the newbies. So again, they're less sensitive to how important this was. I thought that was the key issue, but I knew it was for a younger demographic.
I don't know. Funny where my brain goes. I'm trying. I get the age demographic. I'm like wondering if when I get older, then I'm just gonna stop caring what the government does, and I'm just because I'm like I find it just like okay. So the grocery thing, the housing market, but then you walk around on the street, like and you see the drugs, you see the crime, you see all these things. All this is under the Liberals. At some point, all these people would be impacted just the same as someone entering the housing market.
No, there are certainly issues that do impact, but clearly we saw from the polls that, this is totally anecdotal, but you ever notice all the pictures of Mr. or Prime Minister Carney standing in front of his mobs? How much white hair? I mean, I could have hidden in there. There's so much white hair in there. It wasn't the young people. And again, I think the housing market, and I said it repeatedly, think about this. Immigration was not a topic in this election. They were not allowed to have that as a topic in the leaders' debate. What has had a more profound impact on housing in the major urban centers like Toronto and Vancouver than temporary visas and the explosion in immigration? That wasn't discussed. They didn't bring it up because that's another bad liberal issue. I couldn't believe how successful, and I'm not just jumping on the mainstream media. There's lots of good people there. But boy, the fact that was not a major topic of conversation when it manifested in so many ways that do impact us, for example, healthcare. We don't have the social infrastructure to handle 2.3 million people coming in and over just a couple of years. And keep in mind, we have no system in place to this day that we know if you got a temporary visa that you left when it expired. We have no system in place for that. That does an accurate count. We didn't know how many were coming into the country on temporary visas, but we did know it put added upward pressure on rents. pressure on affordability and housing. And there's other issues, but we never discussed it in the election.
You've been at this a long time. I don't mean to date you, but you're 75?
70. I voted for Abraham Lincoln. No, John A. McDonald and I were buddies. No, I'm 73. Going on
73. Well, hey, there you go. 73. Okay. So the only reason I bring it up is because I look at your wealth of information, right? Like you're sitting there, you've been staring at this game for a long time. I've been staring at politics I keep reiterating this to the audience. I'm a hockey player. I love hockey. When I first started on the podcast, I was fortunate enough to interview people like Ron McLean and Don Cherry and on and on and on. And I was just like, I love the game of hockey. I think there's so many things about it that are just so wonderful to honestly to kids, teaching them a lot of different valuable lessons. And in the culture of hockey is just a really beautiful thing. But when I step into politics, in my 4 years, you're just learning how this culture is and how the game is played and how they do certain things. When you talk about immigration not being one of the things, were you surprised by that? Or you're like, no, listen, every election has its taboo subjects, if you will, that they're just not going to broach in the election debate or in the conversations because for some reason, it's a hot topic and we're just going to steer away from that one.
Yeah, I was appalled. That's the right word for me. I was appalled it wasn't. Because if you looked at different variables or different policies that had the most profound impact on Canadians, immigration would be, in the short list for the most important thing. And yet it wasn't discussed. And I think there's a ton of questions about why. Why wouldn't that be front and center, given that we already knew that the housing discussion, and I appreciate this, wasn't there the famous, I think it was Kim Campbell who said elections are no place to discuss issues. I think she did years and years ago. But when are they a place? Where's economics discussed? And there's exceptions, I know, but in the broad base, I found the housing discussion almost laughable. I found the response to the Trump tariffs. Where's the push to have more depth to all of these things? But the Trump tariffs, President Trump and our reaction or response to him certainly sucked the oxygen out of the room for a lot of subjects. But I think there's no excuse not to have talked immigration.
Would you say then this election cycle was different than anything you've witnessed in the past? I guess I'm just, once again, I come back to it. You've looked at a lot of different elections. You've seen a lot of different leaders come through in your time. And forgive me, I just, in my brain, I hear off the start that you've been into politics for a very long time. And so I go, okay, so you've been paying attention to this for a while. Yes. Is this election an anomaly on how they framed Trump, the Americans, bad orange, the orange guy bad, and that's all we're going to talk about? We're not going to talk about all the issues we have, because if we did, as you pointed out, they can't run on any of that. Everything's falling apart. So is this, sorry.
No, it's that combination, is that they couldn't run on those things. Who was happiest that we kept talking about Trump and tariffs? So it's got to be the Liberal Party. They'd been in power for 10 years. And no, I can never remember a time where I think you can make a pretty good argument that Trump was the key variable. There are several things that are involved here, but really without Trump, I think you get a different election result. And I can never remember that, where an external factor, and not a surprise it would be out of the US, because of course our major trading partner, et cetera. No, I can't think of a time when that played such a prominent role in this entire election. And how many times, I just saw one of the more recent Liberal posts on the Liberal Party they were saying, look how few times Poilievre talked about Trump. That's outrageous. You know what I mean? It was just so obvious, playing to people's emotions, playing to people's fears. And Donald Trump certainly gave plenty of ammo that I don't know, liberals or conservatives or NDP would support the tariff approach that Trump's taken. But it's too bad that we haven't, forget the election for a second, we didn't debate what our response should be. You weren't allowed to debate our response. And I mean, the sarcasm, gripped me when I think we're going to stand up to Trump. I know how. We'll make Canadians pay 20 billion more in tariffs. That'll really show them. Canadians, because that's a retaliatory tariff.
Yeah.
We're the only two countries put
I
on
know.
retaliatory tariffs, China and Canada. That should have at least begged the conversation, is all I'm saying, that we should have brought that out into the open. And there are several issues that weren't really allowed to be talked about. That was one. I would say supply management was another. It should have had a far more prominent role. And who does that hurt? The poor Canadians we were talking about earlier, who can least afford. One of my messages always is, when you put in a bad policy, who can least afford it? Lower income Canadians. And they're the ones suffering. They're the new 2 million people a month visiting a food bank. 12% increase in homelessness. No, that wasn't an issue.
You mentioned housing is laughable, the conversation on that.
Mm-hmm.
If I could just open that up a bit more, what in your mind is laughable about it, and what do you think needed to get discussed?
Okay, so who's the biggest contributor to housing costs across Canada? It'll be some level of government, whether it's municipal development fees. People listening out from British Columbia understand there's something called the property purchase tax. I'm going to punish you for buying that condo. We'll add $25,000 to it. We know that, for example, when the permit delays come, remember, I've bought the property. I can't get the permit for a year, but I'm paying the mortgage on that bought property. So that adds to the costs. So I thought government's feigning big concern about affordability was always a farce. It was just dishonest. They are the problem. And again, all three levels of government are playing a part. In this particular election, the Liberals, keep in mind, we had Justin Trudeau, and I'm going off the top of my head, was early August 2023 saying housing is not a federal responsibility, after promising to solve it, by the way, several times. Then he says, it's not a federal responsibility. They looked at the polls after that, and wow, there was a blowback. So all of a sudden, they started to have these weekly housing announcements. But amongst those announcements was their prominent claim that we're going to build 4 million houses by 2030. Well, an internal memo of the CMHC showed that they knew that was not going to happen. And they kept on talking about it. So we get to this actual election period, we've got a very similar promise. Prime Minister Carney says, off the top of my head, 3.9 million new homes. They're the tiny little box kind of homes. You can't find anyone in the development business who thinks that's going to happen. Try and find someone who thinks it's a good thing. Because why? You will have this sort of early explosion and then back off. But where's the market going to come anyways? I mean, you've got housing starts dropped across the country, especially Toronto. Housing purchases dropped. I mean, it's different in Alberta. We got more strength in Calgary and even somewhat Edmonton, but Vancouver, Toronto, the main centers, that it's just nonsense. I mean, it's not happening. And my thing is, they know it's not happening and they still say it regularly. Because the choice is always, do they not have a clue or do they think we don't have a clue? And in this case, definitely, and there's a couple of other very stark examples, they think that we don't have a clue to know that that's nonsense what they're peddling. It's not going to happen.
What other stark examples are you referring to?
Shockingly, and this is something that, when Justin Trudeau was prime minister, I never knew if he knew. Honestly, does he have a clue? And well, he showed no sign of any, not even elementary sophistication, not even elementary. I'm not just jumping on him, but I've got lots of examples where he clearly didn't. So in this case, I'm assuming that being a former central banker, that Prime Minister Carney does know it's nonsense. So when he stood up and said, we're going to do a made in Canada auto sector, that is laughable. Again, you won't find anybody who understands that sector to say that's true. Oh, really? We're going to start manufacturing the nuts, the bolts, up to 3,000 parts in a car. We're going to manufacture that here, are we? And the raw materials are coming here. Absolute nonsense. My complaint was he knew that was. He know that's not happening. It's just ridiculous. How many years would that take to reconfigure and establish a supply chain that could manufacture a car that's totally Canadian made? But that was the implication there. And that's not possible. But my complaint is he knows that's not possible. He never had somebody with any sophistication go, hey, we got a good idea that you could do. No one's saying that. And there's other examples, like you look when Australia tried that, it was a disaster. We have this sort of integrated supply chain for a reason. Was it Ricardo who said that years ago? some, it's sort of my example always, should we grow our own bananas so we can have a made in Canada grocery store? Can you imagine the cost? So you do these trading relationships. He's sort of doing the same thing that President Trump is, when he says that, that somehow the U.S. can do without all of these other, supply chain countries. Well, they can't. Unless they're going to pay a lot more. But it's the same thing when you suggest we could do it with automobiles. We can't.
One of the things that I got to give a shout out to Chris Sims. She's been a guest on your show,
yes.
And I have a ton of time for Chris. She's been on lots, and she talked about the CTF has really I just got to sit down with Franco and her Franco Terrazzano, sorry, last week, and they were talking about the carbon tax, right? They put it down to zero, but it's not gone. And then they started talking about the industrial carbon tax. And you saw Pierre bring it up in the debate, and then they attack wall. Nobody would get to the like, what is the industrial carbon tax? What is that going to cost? And how will people feel that? Curious, have you had time to sink your teeth into that, or your thoughts on what an industrial carbon tax looks like and how that plays out for Canadian society?
Yeah, I know what it is, but they haven't given us the details. And one of the best economists in our country is Jack Mintz, University of Calgary. Wonderful work. He just says this is going to be so confusing, so expensive. Stephen Gordon, economist Laval, says one thing we can guarantee, prices are going up. That it's going to be more expensive, less effective than the carbon tax that they've at least brought down to zero at this point. We'll see if they eliminate it. But think about this. If we're going to add that tax, and we're competing with the U.S., which is a normal competitor for us, and they're lowering regulation and lowering business taxes, that's the aspect that we should be focusing on. The whole Trump tariff thing, which I think is ignorance on his part about what's going to happen, but it doesn't matter. If we're competing and you have a choice, the U.S. market, and it's cheaper to manufacture there, and my taxes and regulatory burden are going down while Canada is adding, that just doesn't make any sense. And yet they have not acknowledged that in the least. And that's why Canada's fared so poorly in capital investment. We know that capital investment per worker, capital investment overall has been declining. Well, we're just not, it's not tough to understand. We're not attractive as a place to do it. In fact, what worries me is the number one reason for a major manufacturer to be here is our access to the US market. They're not really, they're not doing backflips about a 41 million people in Canada being potential consumers. No, they're looking at the US, the most richest, best consumer market in the world. And so, boy, it's that combination. We can't do a national carbon tax. It will cost businesses more, increase regulation, be cumbersome, especially while the US is reducing regulatory burden, the cost of regulation, and the cost of doing business taxation wise. So that's not a good thing.
I'd be curious the circles you're in talking to different business people. Yep. I know since 2021, there's been a ton of people exit. I'm sure Canada, but in my conversations with Alberta, I've seen it with my own eyes and ears, or heard it with my own ears, I guess. The amount of businesses that have left, I'm just done with this. And then there was a secondary group that started to, over the last 4 years, start to open up operations in the States. And I know of some interesting conversations that have basically been put forth here in Alberta. Like, if it doesn't go the right way in the next couple of years, we have our exit strategy and we're already set up to just, is it today where we sit today, or is it 6 months from now? But they're already in the process of going to that attractive market. And they look at Carney and what the Liberals have wreaked havoc on Canada for, a decade and more to come, and are walking out the door. Is the same thing in your conversations, or is that specific to Alberta?
Especially in the resource sector. And that means mining. Mining's included in that. That's a huge issue. I look out in British Columbia. And that's important. The provincial regulatory environment, taxation environment plays a part too. Well, in British Columbia, it's very unattractive, especially if you're in the resource sector. And and our numbers in British Columbia, the numbers out there about the record deficit, and combined with that kind of capital exodus. The other one, can I add to that, is young people exodus. Now, this is only anecdotal, but I have two sons in their 30s, both working in an aspect of the financial business. And, as an old father, you go, hey, what's Seamus up to this week? Or what's, so-and-so, haven't seen him in years. I can't believe the number of them where they're working out of the country. I have one son working out of the country. He's never coming back. You can't afford that brain drain, but you can understand it. You can pick lots of locations in the States where the housing is less expensive. And that's a real key component again. There's not a state in the US for the higher income tax level that is not more attractive than our best. Alberta's the best here, but more attractive. I mean, think about it out in British Columbia, where 54 cents of those marginal dollars, you get to keep 46 and the government takes 54. That's part of the competitive landscape. And I think those are the things that are serious. So you're not growing the economy unless we reverse the capital investment outflow. There's no way of doing it. And I think that would be my key policy assessment when I looked at whatever the new Liberal government chooses to do. Let's have a look at it and say, what do you think impact will be on capital investment? Will it come to Canada or is it repel? Because I think you're absolutely right that you've got businesses saying they now have an exit strategy, and think of how difficult we've had it to compete. And we discounted our labor by 30% with a 70-cent dollar, and we still couldn't compete. Well, there should be a big red flashing sign, which, by the way, the Bank of Canada did say it was an emergency. Capital investment per capita was an emergency. So, yeah.
I'm
I a cheerful guy, Shaun? I mean, you can imagine. Let's invite Mike to a party. We'll all get a downer.
No, well, I find I find this. Listen, if you're living in Canada right now, we just elected the Liberals again. I don't think you can be a downer at this point. It's like it's playing. You're watching this going, I can't believe. 2019, I couldn't believe it. 2021, I was angry. Now I'm like, okay, this is the way that part of Canada wants to go. I'm an eternal optimist, right? And at times, does that help or hinder me? I don't know. I'm an eternal optimist. And I wonder, from your brain, you talk about the young people leaving. You're not the only one noticing that.
Yeah.
And I go, what would it take to bring the young people back from and have an influx? And is, like you're seeing the way our country's going. You go, oh, no, I can change in 2 months. Oh, well, not, I guess obviously another election, but you get the point. Like it can actually change real fast. Or you like, no, the trajectory we're on, it would take something cataclysmic to start bringing back these people.
Well, I think, again, people make it the same way. It's not very complicated. I mean, people want opportunities. We all want opportunities. And I think, again, the employment opportunities in some areas, especially, again, when you start looking at high skill level, like technology, for example, like when you can go to the States and keep a significant portion more of your income than you could if you stayed in Canada, that plays a part. If you can take that income and buy a home where you can't afford to do that in our major centers, especially Vancouver, especially Toronto, but it's spread to Hamilton, it's spread to Calgary now. Obviously weather plays a part, so there's a lot of variables. But when you start with the lack of or reduced opportunity if you stay in Canada and higher tax burden, social things like housing, I think we're up against it. And I think that's what we're actually seeing.
A lot of people, I don't know, draw a comparison or say, if we keep on this trajectory, we could become Argentina or that train of thinking. You don't think so?
Well, I've said, there's been a lot of talk about whether the level of debt is sustainable. And I say, well, that's actually the wrong question. You should be asking, what are the implications of it? And what we've said, we've been living the implications. We're living them because, for example, the purchasing power of the currency, that's the key. That's how I think it manifests. It's not some big fire sale that we go out of business, as a country. It just means more and more government revenue goes to sustain it, in terms of interest. Where are they going to get that revenue from? And this is what I'm saying. It doesn't matter what party you're in. You can't take on the level of debt. Now, in this case, we know the Liberals have won. So we can't take on the level of debt they're anticipating or, telling us over the next 4 years with an economy that's stagnating when it comes to productivity. You just can't do it. That is where you run into problems. So what are they going to do? They'll need money. The Bank of Canada will cooperate. They'll create the money, so we can purchase the bonds. Well, your currency's worth less. And that's what people are really reacting to when they say, I can't afford it anymore. And that's what scares me, by the way, when they talked even about the capital gains increases, or in the last, in this election, the NDP had a wealth tax. Well, if you're not first of all, there's a whole debate around that because it's been a failure in Europe when they've done a wealth tax. But what about, am I really ahead if I buy a house for $400,000 or $500,000 in the year 2000 and I'm selling it, I'm just picking a number, so it's $600,000 now? I'm not ahead. That's the inflation impact of it. I can't buy anything more. It didn't go up. It just, it rose with inflation. So I think that's the biggest challenge individual. I don't have trust. I don't believe the government's going to bail me out. So you've got to personally protect yourself about the erosion of the purchasing power of the currency.
Okay. I want to, I'm glad you brought that up. Okay. So you're sitting there, you say you got to personally protect yourself. And what you can see coming, we know Carney's going to be in. And we know he's going to run a giant deficit. Those two things are correct, right? No arguing there?
Absolutely.
So would you, if you're trying to personally protect yourself from what is coming in Canada, not on the table is going to the States or wherever else, you're going to be here.
Yep.
What are some things people could do or look into, or wherever you want to go with that you're like, well, you should be looking into these things, because as they print more money to keep up, because you're like, they're going to run a deficit. Where are they going to get that from? Well, they could raise taxes. They've got a whole bunch of different thoughts. There's one. And two, they could print it, which is going to devalue our currency. And, so there, there's some different avenues to go there. Where does your brain go if you're talking to individuals of, hey, you should think about this.
Well, this is going back several years. I thought the one guarantee, can you predict the future? I said, I can predict one of the future things, and that is government will debase the value of your currency. And believe me, I can really give everyone a headache if I go on about that. I'll just remind them that not a single paper currency in the history of the world has survived. Why? Because governments can't resist it. When I hear Donald Trump saying, I'm going to interfere with the Federal Reserve and fire Jerome Powell, I go, good, because that's the recipe how you get these outrageous levels of inflation that you see in different countries. Interfere with the central bank. But I think that's the most obvious trend going forward. It's been obvious, if you look over the asset prices in the last 10 to 15, 20, and much longer, years. Old people always, I bought my first house for $27,000, and I go, and none of those boards have changed, but somehow the money doesn't buy as much. So now it's $575,000 for the same house.
Yeah.
That's the story that people are experiencing, but have to understand. So I'm protecting myself from the currency. I'm protecting by buying things like gold. And I'm not Johnny come lately. Anyone listening to Money Talks. In fact, I used to get things from financial advisors saying, why do you always talk about gold? Well, this is why. And obviously it's worked out. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't correct short term, which I would bet it would, but I'm buying on dips. That's one example. I like real estate, except for the government does too. And it makes me nervous to the degree the government does. Again, Alberta has a different situation than you look at in Ontario, you look at in British Columbia, where the government has treated housing as a cash cow. In fact, one of the things will be very interesting to see under the Carney government is as things get a little more stressful financially for the country, will they do one of two things with your house? One, you can talk about the primary residence exemption, and keep in mind, it's always been part of the Green Party platform's already had it, but where they say, yes, it's tax-free if you sell your primary residence up to $500,000. Above that, we're going to tax it. So something like that. But there's another side they can do is just simply, a wealth tax would tax the equity in your home. I'm just saying those things are not unreasonable. The government commissioned 2 separate studies on it. Justin Trudeau met with the head of a group called Generation Squeeze, which is big time in favor of that, within the last 2 years. So they've looked at it, that's for sure. Whether they implement, I'm not sure. But so that's why I'm not as keen on housing, because government's been very interested. In British Columbia, you have a speculation tax. And what that only means is that if you own a piece of property in most every populated area, it can't be empty for more than 6 months without incurring a new tax. City of Vancouver has what's called an empty homes tax. There's just so easy to start listing off all the new taxes that have been attached to real estate. They haven't been able to do that with Bitcoin, for example, and haven't been able to do that with gold, or haven't yet, done it with gold. So again, back to the currency, gold's performed. To me, it's a giant confidence game. As confidence leaves the system, that's when gold goes. It's not inflation. People say, well, gold goes up with inflation. I can come up with 500 examples where it didn't. But gold definitely goes up when you start losing confidence in the banking system, confidence in the government. And isn't that what we're seeing right now? So who's buying gold? Central Bank of China. Why? They do not have confidence in the international monetary system, especially in terms vis-a-vis the U.S. treasuries. I'll trade my treasuries and buy gold instead. That kind of thing. It's
when you talk gold. I was just looking at the price today, Canadian 46.24. I might be off as people are listening to this, but you get the general vicinity, all-time highs. Like, I agree with you. And so then I just add into it. It's like, well, do we think confidence under Carney is going to go
yes
up or down?
That's the question, though. I mean, that's the question I wish our legacy media commentariat would start understanding. That's the question. So, like, for example, you talked about businesses maybe at least having an exit strategy. Believe me, if we do things that make it more difficult to do business in terms of cost of regulation and taxation, that drops their confidence, and they're already shaky. That's what you just described. They're shaky now. Do they trust the government? Does the public trust the government? Whatever region. I mean, again, each province controls their medical system, but several provinces have had a horrible time with the closure of emergency rooms. As an example, we know that across the country, somewhere in the neighborhood of 20% of Canadians do not have a family doctor. So confidence in that aspect of the system is eroding. And it's just, when does it manifest at the ballot box? Donald Trump was created by that thought. He didn't create it. He's the byproduct of that lack of confidence in government. I would doubt there's many voters who voted for President Trump who have confidence in government, who want to see it expanded. I think that's the dominant trend as we go through the next, shorter than I thought, I think the next 5 to 8 years. We're going to see more and more about that. So I'm with you. I look at whatever actions the government takes. Does that increase my confidence level or decrease in the government's ability to deliver? And let's face it, they didn't run on that record for a good reason, because it has not been able to deliver in the major issues. Sorry, I can go on and on because I think this is the key question. I'll just give you one more. Do you think confidence in the media were lower than it was 10 years ago?
Oh, it's in the toilet.
In the toilet. And they're another part of the establishment. I would say the same thing about universities, that the trust in the university has been declined, whether they want to acknowledge it or not. If I was a Jewish student at a major Canadian university, I sure have less confidence, or a Jewish Canadian, for example, that the government's going to protect me. They've done nothing, and that's, to me, was another key issue that didn't get near enough attention. I mean, it's changed the character of our country, but back to our point, it reduced confidence in what the government's doing.
Well, last night on the election coverage that we had at midnight, Mountain Standard, we had just shy of 89,000 people watching simultaneously. And, when we were watching other networks, we were, by all accounts, from what we could see, somewhere in the vicinity of number 2. And the only group ahead of us was the CBC. And we chuckle about that because you're talking about what's the confidence in media. It's like, well, we don't have 89,000 people watching us, or 80. The turnout of people tuning in was well over that. It was 88,000 people watching simultaneously. One of the channels we had over 100,000 people come in and out through the first 12 hours. Right, we were looking at it last night in the wee morning hours, I guess. And so you go media confidence. I don't see how that comes back. I just don't see it. So that's going down simultaneously. One of the things I heard at Kearney last night was this interprovincial trade by July 1st. He's going to do away with it. I would think, to me, I don't care where you stand on Kearney. That's a good thing, right? Getting rid of that. Okay. So confidence gets a small bump, but then everything else we've talked about for the last hour, I don't hear him addressing any of it. And I guess I want to ask, because where I sit, I own a house, and I feel like a huge number of Canadians, you probably know the statistics, own a house. And this home equity tax or different versions of that, I heard last night on the live stream, if he does something like that, the economy will go right in the toilet. Would you agree with that? Or are you like, it's just another little thing that they just picking away at the confidence and the capital of the individual?
I go more on the latter. That's about the individual, because does that determine whether I'm going to develop something? There's so many other variables in my way to begin with. I wasn't going to anyways. And that is a big problem for housing. Is, what's really interesting, I read something, not to digress from what you're asking, but
sure.
I read something about the comment on the People for Affordable Housing Canada support the Kearney plan. I said, well, you might want to ask a developer. You might, not an advocate. Of course, they're in favor of anything that, whatever their goal is, but it's the developers you need to talk to. Academics have lots to add to it, but still, the rubber hits the road when a developer says, no, this is what's important to me and I'm not doing it. And right now the weak housing market will discourage more development. Why do I want more product I can't sell in the first place? So I would think it just sort of piles on to that challenge. And the perception too, though. I'm not sure if there's too many in the business community who, perceive of a Mark Carney government as positive for business. I would bet most of them are sitting there going, as how negative will it be for business? And again, will the climate agenda supersede business concerns? Because that's what we've been doing for 10 years. And again, You may like that and you may not like it, but the facts are right there. The stats are right there with them. So I just don't think they've got a lot of work to do, as you asked about the legacy media. Until the legacy media stands up and goes, this is where we blew it. This is what I wish we had done differently. It's acknowledge the problem before you can move forward. And again, but the Liberals just got away with not doing that. There was the odd statement, but it was, you know what? We've been a disaster for 10 years. If economics and finance was your number one issue, we haven't delivered. I think you have to acknowledge the problem first. And I think the media has a real problem. But sorry, in saying that, Shaun, I can look at people like you. You are also in the media. It's just changed. You're not in the mainstream media. I look at the brilliant work done by people like Terry Glavin, who does put articles in the National Post. I look at, without Sam Cooper, we certainly wouldn't understand both the federal code and China, but the amazing increase in infiltration. I'm sorry, I'm not getting everybody off the top of my head. I had a chance to interview Jonathan Manthorpe. He was just a fabulous interview, not in the mainstream anymore. So a lot of great people have gravitated to Substack, for example. And, I've subscribed to many of them because it's good work. So there's some good people. And also in the mainstream, Robert Fife, Stephen Chase have done some good stuff, and I think valuable stuff. But as a whole, there's still lots of good people in the media. But so many of them have gravitated outside the so-called legacy and mainstream into platforms like you're doing here, like the podcast platform, and of course Substack, which has exploded.
I guess before I'll give you an option for your the last question here. We can go back into gold and silver. I'm very curious. Wasn't that long ago. I don't know what the price was. $3,000 Canadian, using Canadian figures again. And now, I go back to the 4,600 or the censorship. Because as an independent media guy, I look at what we do and having these conversations. And under Carney, he terrifies me of clamping down, of not only the war on Trump, but the war on Elon Musk owning X, and talking about quieting down or limiting access, or whatever term you want to put on there. I'll give you final say if you want to go down that road, or gold and silver, whichever way you want to go, Michael.
I'm going to go both very quickly. In gold, decide if you're long-term or short-term. I have long-term money in gold, and I'm not moving in and out of it because I have full confidence they're going to erode the purchasing power of my currency. Silver's got a more industrial component, so it moves slower. In the same thing, though, as I've been a big uranium fan, done very well with that. I like Alberta oil and gas because it's at a discount, because over time, I think we'll be rewarded. Silver just slower, but again, real key, what's your time frame? What portion of your portfolio it is? So answer those questions, and like, for example, I think for my trading, not trading, but sort of the growth oriented / trading, I'm looking for a correction in gold. I think it's gone parabolic. Probability is, and I don't like the risk, it'll come down. That'll provide another buying opportunity, within it. But my core, I don't change. Censorship, I think, should be on everyone's mind. It's the foundation of democracy. And it's not just sort of a theoretical thing. They have done it. Bill C-10, Bill C-36, Bill C-60, whatever it was. The Memorandum 103, I think it was. But the list is, Prime Minister Carney is part of that group, that attitude that says they want censorship of digital, especially social media, despite the fact that I could make a good case that government is the biggest purveyor of false information. But look what's happened in the UK. It's unbelievable to the degree It's gone already, and other countries. So no one should underestimate the desire that they have to control speech. And that comes back to a more fundamental attitude they have, is that they're right. They're not welcoming questions. Assign me a kind of, in quotes, hot topic where they welcomed challenges. And that's really limiting. Freedom is based on free speech, but so is progress. It's questioning the status quo that moves us forward. And there's too many subjects out of bounds, but they are committed to controlling the digital space. And that should scare Canadians. Like, literally, I'm proud to say, Shaun, I've been canceled, I think, 5 times now.
Canceled?
One cancel, but suspended. Like, all of a sudden, my Facebook account's down. Well, of course, they don't give you an explanation. For it. So I've had, I'm just saying, it's there.
That's honestly, on my side, that's where I come from. That's almost standard operating procedure.
Yeah.
If you haven't been canceled, it's just like, all I'm trying to do is talk to people. You can love or hate what they say, but
yes.
that right there puts you into rough waters, right?
Yes.
But when I look at you, I go, if that isn't the state of Canada right there, that Michael Campbell's had things shut down, that actually shocks me. That might be my Michael Campbell shocking stat of the week.
Yeah. Well, and again, all of it was for questions. All of it was for questioning. I understand the limits of my knowledge. So I wasn't in a position to question, to make statements about approach to COVID, for example. But I was in a position to ask questions about it. That's just one example. They've successful in not having a conversation about climate change and the approaches that we're taking to it. As I said earlier, no cost benefit analysis is not the way I'd go about things. There's so many subjects that are, in quotes, off limits in so much of the media. Well, Alberta Premier Danielle Smith experienced that directly and handed in a resignation letter to the Chorus Network saying there's too many no-fly zones. Well, she said, so I'm going to give you my notice. Well, she didn't last a week. Those are not positive things. And so I think we should not underestimate the degree that free speech is on the line, that it was on the line in this election, whether people was a pivotal issue for people or not. It was definitely, Mark Carney said he's going to continue that approach. They've tried it several times through legislation, and they haven't worked yet. But he said he's going to continue. I think free speech should be top of mind for people. Yeah,
it was, to me, it was one of the, you talk about some of the, I keep saying taboo subjects that weren't talked about. The free speech one was one that I was listening intently because of what I do and where I go and the conversations I have into the uncomfortable conversations, right? Like there's times where I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh, this one's going to get me in hot water, but people want to talk and I want to ask questions. I think that's what this is about. And if you're going to help people and help yourself, you need to ask questions. You need to look at things, discern the information, and try and then move forward the best possible way you can.
Yeah, challenge yourself that way. It's really interesting. What a difference compared to financial analysis, investment analysis. First thing I do is look for where am I wrong? What am I missing? I search out the alternative opinions in case I miss something. Why? Because it's going to cost me money, and so as an approach. I know we're finished, so I just want to give one more thing. I was disappointed for another time. I can't believe that Chinese interference in our election for the last 10 years and longer was not an election issue.
How is it? And on this side, we have more time, and we always have more time, Michael. I'm just being very conscious of the time frame we set at the start. So forgive me for if we got to go. I'll throw it back in your court now. How is it that you can have election interference? It doesn't get talked about. Nobody knows who the MPs are. We have a full-on election. I'm like, forgive me, once again, I'll bring it up. I've been staring at this for 4 years. I'm like, is this the way politics is? Like, how is it that isn't like talked about by anyone?
Especially front and center, front and center. We know the Chinese work department front. I'm just slipping the mind right now. I know them well, but they're the front for the Communist Party of China. When they know they're controlling the riding in Markham, Ontario. They're controlling riding in Richmond, BC. It's not small time stuff, and we've been warned about it. So I was shocked about that. And my last one about the election, I can't believe that the incredible rise in anti-Semitism wasn't an issue. I mean, it changed the character of our country. We had 19 Liberal MPs sign on to something called votepalestine.ca that, amongst other tenets, that said, we insist on the withdrawal from Palestine immediately, from Gaza immediately, but no mention of Hamas, no mention of hostages. They wanted us to give more money to UNRWA for the UN, despite the fact that there has been convictions of participating in October 7th. It's things like that. I just think that changed the character of Canada, and we should have at least shown the respect of talking about it. It's a very different, nothing shocked me more than the rise of anti-Semitism. I had no idea it was like this rampant in our country. It made sense, given they're out of control, and that wasn't just my words. Prime Minister Trudeau said out of control immigration system and visa, and Mark Carney has alluded to the same thing. So, yeah, I just wish that has been talked about. So I'm sorry, Shaun, but
no, don't apologize. I appreciate you giving me some time today. I hope we get to do it again. I got to give a shout out to Chris Sims yet again, because I've been trying to get through to have you on, because one of the things on this side is like I say, I got 3 older brothers. We share around a ton of your content when you have on different people talking on specifically the economy, and because there's a lot of great insights in what you do. And then just I stare at you, and I see a guy who's been in this for a very long time, talking to very brilliant people, has an understanding of the trends and where it leads us. And, is it, can you predict the future? Of course, everyone should be cautious of anyone who says, I know exactly what's going to happen.
Sure.
But certainly you give in, you fill in parts of the puzzle, and that allows people to make more informed decisions, if you would. And I'm just glad I finally got to have you on. And hopefully look forward to the next time. Either way, Michael, thanks for hopping on today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Shaun.